Hi, this is Mariette Hartley, and you are listening to TV Confidential.
Ed Roberts with a reminder that the next edition of TV Confidential will air next week on this station at the usual time. We hope you'll join us for that. In the meantime, a reminder that Columbo Explains the 70s by Glenn Stewart, available wherever books are sold through Bonaventure Press, bonaventurepress.com, as well as Amazon.com. While we are in a Columbo frame of mind, we will close out this week's program by bringing you a clip of a conversation that originally aired in July 2020 with Basil Hoffman. Basil Hoffman, one of the most prolific character actors in film and television, a man who worked with 14 Oscar-winning actors, 2 Oscar-winning cinematographers, 10 Oscar-winning directors, plus he appeared in 2 Academy Award-winning Best Pictures, while his television credits include such classic series as Seinfeld, Sanford & Son, The Rockford Files, Hill Street Blues, Ellery Queen, MASH, and Columbo. Basil Hoffman passed away in September 2021. When Basil visited our program in July 2020, he shared a few memories of working with Peter Falk on Columbo. Plus, he talked about working with such tall actors as James Garner and Jim Hutton, and working with such iconic film directors as Carl Reiner and Robert Redford. You were also shrewd, Basil, in that at the time you first came out to L.A., it was the last vestiges of what I would call the line of demarcation between working in television and working in feature motion pictures, which is the mentality was you did one, you didn't do both. And if you were fortunate enough, as you were, to get your foot in the world of feature motion pictures, you did not go back into television. But you seem to take a different approach. You seem to look for work, the best parts you can find, regardless of the medium.
Yep. And I learned an important lesson, and I don't want to go into why I learned the lesson, but for the last 30 years of my career, I've tried very hard to say yes to every offer that I get. My manager and I try very hard to find some reason for me to take the job, and sometimes the money isn't there. Sometimes somebody can't afford. Oh, and then we have 2 rules, by the way, my manager and I. And the first rule is we don't expect any producer to pay me more than they can afford to pay. And we also don't expect any producer to pay me less than they can afford to pay.
That's fair.
And that has worked out very well.
Yeah.
And the very first thing that I tell my manager is, after I've read a script, if I want to do the job, I say, his name is Brad Lamack, and I say, Brad, I want to do this. I love this role. Let's see how we can make it happen. And Brad gets on it, and often sometimes we can't. Sometimes it would cost me so much money, or there's some other situation where I can't take the job, but we try very hard to make it possible for me to do the job.
I was delighted to see that you worked with Carl Reiner in one of my favorite movies of the last 30 years.
All of me?
Yes.
Well, I'll tell you a story. I had auditioned for that movie. I auditioned for the role of an attorney, and I didn't get the job. Mm-hmm. And my agent at the time calls me, and this is just in the 1980s. Mm-hmm. And my agent calls me and says, Basil, Carl doesn't want you for the lawyer. He says he wants you to be the court reporter. And that's the guy who types on this little machine. Mm-hmm. And I said, I don't want to do that. And he said, well, okay, we'll turn him down. And my agent calls me back. He says, Basil, Carl really wants you to do that part, and here's what he's offering in terms of money. I said, I don't want to do it. I don't want to do it. And finally, it got to the point, and I think I kept saying no, and I think it got to be a little thing between me and Carl. And Carl was thinking to himself, who in the hell does Basil Hoffman think he is? Turning me down. I'm directing this big movie. Who in the hell? He can't turn me down. So finally, my agent calls me and says, Basil, here's what Carl wants to do. Now, this is the 1980s. Mm-hmm. He says, Carl will pay you $5,000 for 3 days. You can't tell anybody else. would you take the job? I said, yep. So that's how I got in the movie. And it was I think it was a little feud between me and Carl. And I never discussed it with him, but I always got a look from him like, how in the hell did you make me do this? It was funny. And by the way, he was a terrific guy.
That's
just a terrific guy to work with.
That's what I've been told. I've never had the pleasure of talking to him, but I've been told that he was an actor's director, and that because he knew he knew, because he was an actor, he knew how to talk to actors and treat actors as people on the set.
Yeah, he was an actor's director. And by the way, I have observed that there are really two types of directors. And by the way, even though I prefer one over the other, it's not a bad thing. But there are actor-first directors. And by that I mean the director wants to see how the actor is going to do the scene, what the actor is going to do, and then he shoots that. And then there are directors who have already set up the camera when you walk on the set. And I'll give you a number of instances of both who I've worked for. Alan J. Pakula, Richard Benjamin, Sidney Pollack were actor-first directors. They wanted to see what the actor would do. And I'll tell you a little story about Sidney Pollack in a minute. And then there are camera-first directors who already have the camera set when you get on the set, or tend to do that. And the Coen Brothers are in that category, who I've worked with, and Steven Spielberg is in that category. And from the results that they get from their actors and the results that they get in the final production of their movies, I would say that one really is not superior to the other, although I prefer to work with a director who wants to see what the actor does before he does anything. When I worked for Sidney Pollack on The Electric Horseman, we were shooting a lot of it in Caesar's Palace in Las Vegas. And by the way, we were staying in Caesar's Palace. What a dream that was. That was nice. But we were shooting in one of the rooms, and there were 5 or 6 actors in this scene. I was in the scene. Nicholas Coster was in the scene. James Sicking, Jim Klein, Jane Fonda, John Saxon. A number of us were in the scene. And we were all there waiting for Sidney. And Sidney comes in, and he says, we had a little chat for a minute. He says, all right, he said, anybody have any questions? And nobody did. And then Sidney said, okay, let's see it. And Sidney wanted the actors to block the scene.
Oh, wow.
He wanted the actors to know where they belonged in the scene, where the character belonged in the scene, how the scene would go. And after we did it, he gave a few notes, asked a couple of questions. And the only thing he asked me was, he said, Basil, can you do the same thing seated? Because I was standing. And it was easy for him to shoot it if I was seated. And then he said, okay. He said, I want to bring, he said, take a few minutes. He said, I'll bring Owen in, Owen Royceman, the great cinematographer, 5 times Oscar-nominated cinematographer. Owen Royceman, he says, I'll bring Owen in. I want Owen to look at it, and then we'll light it and we'll shoot it. So that was it. And then, by the way, I was so sad when Sidney died, and I still think about it. He was so generous to me. He wrote that very short, sweet foreword for my acting book, Acting and How to Be Good at It. And every time I met Sidney, he was complimentary about some movie that he'd seen me in. What a sweet, dear guy, great director, also a terrific actor. And for the second edition of my book, I wrote a little tribute to Sidney. He had died before the second edition came out. I wrote a little thing about him in the book.
Stay with us, folks. We'll be right back.
This portion of TV Confidential is brought to us by our friends at Front Porch Realty, the community of realtors in the Northern Bay area of California that is committed to finding the solution that is best for their clients. Whether you're a first-time home buyer or looking to sell or lease your property in Northern California, call Karen Strain at 415-886-7411 or visit FrontPorchRealtyGroup.com for more information on how they can help you.
Ed Robertson, thanking you for listening to the TV Confidential podcast. If you like what you hear, please hit the subscribe button so that you won't miss our next episode. I got a Richard Benjamin story for you if I have time.
Sure.
It kind of relates to Carl as well.
Okay. Go for it.
Richard visited our program about 6 months ago, and one of the things we talked about was how my favorite year was his first time as a feature film director. And so, like a smart person, Richard reached out to his network of actors and actors who had directed. And one of the people he reached out to was Carl Reiner. And I'm quoting Richard here. Carl asked Richard, "What kind of movie is it?" And Richard said, "It's a comedy." And Carl said, "Hire funny people."
That's funny.
Yeah.
That's funny, and that's really typically Carl.
And sometimes sometimes it really is as simple as that.
Yep. God, that's funny.
Yeah.
Now I'm going to retell that story, and then by the way, I'm going to say that it was said to you and not to me.
Okay.
Gosh, that's funny.
Yeah.
That is funny. Hire funny people. Well, he did.
Yeah.
And in my favorite year, I noticed how free Richard was, seemingly, and I can't imagine what he must have been going through his head. He was directing this great actor.
Peter O'Toole, yeah.
Yeah, Peter O'Toole, and a first-time director. And what we found out was, in the shooting, that Peter O'Toole is a very accommodating actor, was a very accommodating actor. And he would do anything that was required to make the scene better, to make it better for the director, to make it better for him. And the only other actor I can think of right offhand, and I'm sure a lot of actors are like that, but the only other actor I can think of who was like that was Peter Falk.
You just anticipated my question, man. You did the Mensa episode of Columbo.
Yep.
With Theo Backel was also, he was the murderer in that.
Right.
And I have been told that Falk took a theater actor's approach to filming Columbo, and that he allowed as many takes as possible for he and his fellow acting partner to get the scene right.
You are exactly right, Ed. He would do anything to accommodate another actor. And I can remember one particular point. It was late at night. We were shooting on location, and Peter had the assistant director come to me. We took a break for a meal, and I had a shot of all that was left was my close-up. And Peter sent the AD to me to ask me whether or not I needed Peter, after the meal, to do his off-camera lines. Just that.
Mm-hmm.
Just that. And I said, send Peter home. I said, I'll do the scene. I can do my close-up and just have somebody else do the lines off-camera for me. And then don't make Peter stay after the meal. But Peter would do that. And Peter would do anything to accommodate another actor and to accommodate the director. And he was a very sweet guy. Just a sweet man, and you could see all of this in him. And he was this way throughout the shoot. He accommodated me in another scene. And this is not worth my mention, actually. But just people who should know that when they see those old Columbo reruns, to know what a gem and what a gent this guy was. Peter Falk. Terrific to work with.
One of the early TV roles you did around the time you did the Columbo, and it may have been either just before or just after you did President's Men, but you did an early episode of Rockford Files.
Yes.
And it's been years since I've seen that show, but since Jim Garner was on camera 90% of the time, I'm guessing you had FaceTime with him. Do you have any memories of working with Jim Garner?
Well, I have two memories, and one of them is interesting because I'm pretty tall,
Mm-hmm.
and James Garner was one of the tall actors.
Yes, he was.
And it's really interesting how many of them there were. Robert Young, Alan Alda. I got the tall actors. Well, anyway, I remembered that he was tall, and I remembered how accommodating he was, and how joyful he was in the work. And what I remember most about James Garner is, gosh, he just loved doing it.
Yeah.
He just loved doing it, and I think it came through in every shot. And the humor in Rockford Files was just there in almost every moment. No matter how threatening the moment was to him, there was some humor in him that made that scene work and made the show work.
Yeah.
Hugely successful show.
Jim Hutton was another tall actor that you worked with.
That's correct. Not only did I work with Jim Hutton, but I later worked on a film with his son in Ordinary People.
Mm-hmm.
Worked with Tim Hutton. And I worked with a number of father and sons. It's kind of funny.
Maybe we could talk about that next time you visit our program.
Ed, I would love to come back. You've been a very generous host, and gosh, I enjoyed it.
Actor Basil Hoffman from a conversation that originally aired in July 2020 here on TV Confidential. Basil Hoffman passed away in September 2021. A reminder that the International City Theater production of I Love You, You're Perfect, Now Change, directed by Barry Pearl, runs Wednesday, February 18th through Sunday, March 8th at the Beverly O'Neill Theater at the Long Beach Convention and Entertainment Center in Long Beach, California. Tickets and more information, call 562-436-4610, 562-436-4610, or go to internationalcitytheater.org. Ed Roberts, after Tony Figueroa, Donna Allen, Phil Grice, and Susan Silver, thank you so much for listening. Stay healthy, stay safe. We'll talk to you next time on TV Confidential.